Well met, weary traveler. Come in and sit by the fire for a moment. Take up your flagon of ale or mead and lend your ear. Let us regale you with the tales of bygone adventure and the wisdom of ages. Or, just listen in while three dudes named Jeff, Chad, and Jeremy talk about role-playing games.
Yeah, man. So, as far as, emotions go for me, man, I don't know. I mean, how do you guys want to define this? Because this is, for me, a really kind of big thing, because I tend to put a lot of emotion into my characters to begin with. And I don't know if we're talking, emotions from a character perspective, or are we talking, emotions from, a DM's perspective?
I think we should probably touch on both.
Okay, that'd be cool. I'm down for that. That's fine.
Because just one, I think, would probably be a little too light.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like we can hit both of them. Yeah, we can definitely hit both of them, and it won't be, super jarring. I think it'll be okay. So, yeah, for me, emotions in a game are, vital, I think. I think if you're not playing on some form of emotion, or if you don't have, a idea in your head when you go to, write a game down, that, oh man, you know what, this scene or this encounter should evoke this thing, then, I think you're doing part of this game a disservice a little bit, because we play humanoid creatures, and they have humanoid emotions, and we should have those sort of interactions with each other, whether you're playing as a character or as a DM, it should feel realistic. I mean, even though it's a fantasy thing, it should feel real to a certain extent, because that's how you get involved and emotionally invested in your characters.
Yeah, that's true. But sometimes you do have to kind of rein it in.
That's true.
Just like I'm going to have to rein you in right now, Chad, because we really haven't even done the introduction yet.
Oh, so sorry.
I know. We haven't even bantered yet.
I went straight in. I don't play around, man. I'm sorry. You guys...
There's no kissing here.
There's no. I'm not waiting for a drum roll. I'm just going to go right in and help out.
I'm over here, all right, guys, give me 2 seconds. I'll be right back. And I come back and Chad's just going in.
Chad's waist deep in it.
I'm just I don't even care, man. You guys can come back whenever you want. I'm just gonna hang out and just start blabbing. They have to put a muzzle on me. They're like, we regret bringing him in at all. Why did we do this?
No. We were finding it was really hard to fill time.
That's true.
Before.
Episode 4, the Chad Nick
rant
podcast.
It's just
slightly featuring barely Jeremy and Jeff.
Jesus,
I love it. Oh my god.
I've taken over the show, guys. I'm sorry.
Dudes of Yore?
Dudes of Yore, yeah, please.
Episode 5,
us.
I think.
I
think it's
5, 4, 3,
Cinco.
2. I don't know. I've given up. No, it should be. I think 5. I think it's 5.
Yeah, I think we're on 5 now.
Mm.
So we're talking about how to strike emotion in your games. And I think we're going to hit it like Chad was talking about from 2 different angles. Mainly from GMing or, setting the games up ahead of time. And then also from the side of a player.
Yes. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, I think we'll be able to cover bases better.
Similar but different approaches to the same thing, and both sides have to be there.
Mm-hmm. For sure. But to hit back on what you were saying, Chad, I mean, I absolutely agree. As a storyteller in general, you have to have an idea of what kind of emotion you want to invoke in your audience.
Mm-hmm.
And for role-playing games, for those that aren't online, your audience is simply your players and yourself to a degree.
Absolutely.
And then if you are playing online, then I do think that there needs to be some consideration given to the people that may listen or watch your game. So, essentially, being a storyteller, the goal of a storyteller is to move your audience in the end. To teach them a lesson or to provoke some kind of response. And usually the more
even if it's
visceral,
just to make them feel a certain thing.
Yes,
a certain
exactly.
Way.
And the more visceral, the better. generally.
Yes.
You know, when it's not a measured response, when it's a knee-jerk response. When you can make somebody cry, or you can make somebody jump.
There are so many times where I've been in games and I've just like read the chat on the sidebar, you know, and like to watch people who are watching the shows have the same visceral reactions that you're having in game at the same time, like they're getting shocked when things happen, or they're starting to cry when really sad moments happen. It makes you feel good that like obviously you're impacted in the moment by that thing, but at the same time, at the end of the game, it makes you feel good that, oh, cool, that emotion was depicted, and everyone in the audience also felt that too. Like, that feels good to me at the end of the day, if that sort of moment resonates around the table.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that a lot of people are beginning to realize about role-playing games, and probably one of the reasons why it's kind of growing in popularity in recent years, is because there is a way to experience emotions at the table in a way that feels safer than in real life.
Oh, absolutely.
That's exactly it. Like I think that's absolutely like the thing about them that for me is like the most fulfilling part, is the ability to explore something like grief or fear, like something that's like typically like you would never want to have to go through, but you can feel what it feels like to have those emotions without like the real life stakes. Like you're not actually in real life wondering for your life, or you know, grieving somebody who's lost, but you can still feel those things, but without the deep impact.
You're having those really dynamic, like just gut wrenching moments that in my normal life, I wouldn't have, nor would I actually venture out to like pursue heavily. But you go, you know what would be really nice today? Maybe a funeral scene would be really nice today. Like, I know that it's probably not going to make the rest of my players happy, and there's going to be this really like heavy emotional burden at the very beginning of the game. But it's necessary for storytelling, and then everybody has this like cathartic moment of invested emotion. We all enjoy it, and we all feel it at the same time, and then it all gets released, and there's joy at the end. You know, like I feel like that.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think that's the key difference, is you get to feel all those feelings, and then once it's done, just be like, okay, that's done. Like you don't have to like. There's not like the lingering effect of like, when will I stop feeling like this? When will it be over? Like, it's just like you get the full breadth of the power of it, and then afterwards know that you just get to let it fall off and be gone.
When experiencing the death of a loved one who's close, grief can generally take a really long time to work through all of the various psychological stages, and there isn't much of a release from it. You can't turn your television or your computer off, or you know, put your dice and your books away and step away from that emotion. You know, it's raw and it's attached to the nerve. There's luckily a little bit of a buffer with stuff like role-playing games, or even watching a movie or reading a book, so that you can feel that emotion, and it feels real in the moment. But like you said, you know, afterward you can step away and break that hold that it has on you, and it, like you said, it's very cathartic. It's good to kind of flush those emotions out.
Every now and then, it's always good to have like a really good cry, or be like really, or you know, especially in some of the recent games that I've played, like having those moments where you go and they say, okay, well, guess what? This week's going to be a battle scene. Right? Like, you guys are gonna go into battle. And immediately, like, that changes my mindset. That says, cool, I get to be angry, I get to experience rage, I get to experience, like, all of the screaming and just all of the frustration that I've carried throughout my entire week. I get to invest it in this character and just let it out with no shame and no, like, fighting back. They just want that to happen, and you just take it and you invest your own personal kind of emotions into that character so you can have that moment of release, you know, outside of doing it in an unhealthy way. You use it in a healthy way through gaming, you know? That's what I do. I use it as an escapist form.
Yeah, it's a vent.
Of venting.
I think like one of the, at least for me, underrated elements, and maybe it's less so for other people, or maybe misjudging it, but like I think that there's a very big amount of like something that I think happens in a lot of normal life is like this inability to be truly like fully sincere about something. Like there's always has to be that kind of like barrier that you have to put up of like, well, you know, is it really okay to express this emotion like this? Is it like, you know, what are people going to think? Blah, 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 blah. And like in an RPG scene, like it really kind of gives you with the right group, like a way to just be like, nope, I'm just going to go all in. Like, I'm not going to leave anything off. We're going to go as far as we can bear to go. And no one's going to say like, oh, that was like, you're being too much. It's too much to handle. Like when it's done well, you kind of have this ability to like actually like truly express things that I think a lot of times we're kind of forced either by ourselves or by other people to bury. It kind of is a unique way of expressing that we don't usually get to do.
I feel like, Jeff, I've been in a couple of games that you've run before, and you are really good at making you have to experience emotions. You make a player go and question like moral quandaries. You make them question certain things that like certain emotions and how would I handle this, right? Like you give us an opportunity or a scenario and then like, okay, cool. How would you handle that? I remember one recent game that you ran, which was like the Fractured game. And if you haven't watched that game, I suggest you go over to his channel right now in Counterbalance, and you go and you find that game, and you watch that game. That game, like, tripped me out for days. I kid you not, it was amazing. But it was one of those that, like, emotionally impacted me, too, because I got invested in the characters really early, and you did that dynamically through describing the characters, describing the area, describing kind of how everything shifted and switched and things like that. Like the different things that you did, not only in description, but placement and time and stuff, all added to that like emotional tension throughout the whole game. And then by the end, I was just like, okay, I'm done. I can't handle any more. Jeff, stop. Don't do anything else. Please. You know, and it's just one of those things that like, I want to learn how to get better at as a DM going forward, because I watch guys like you and Jeremy, and I've seen a bunch of games that Megan's run over on Dice on Ice, things like that are just so dynamically impactful for things like fear and suspense and stuff like that, that like, I want to learn how to do better, because I feel like I don't deliver that yet. And I want to be able to find those core emotions and play with those. I think that would be a fun thing on my end as a DM.
Yeah. And one more point that I do want to interject before we start kind of getting into the nitty-gritty is I think it's also important with role-playing games as far as emotions go and exploring those emotions is not only is it a event, a way to release emotions that are pent up inside of you, but also when you experience those emotions in a role-playing game, it actually kind of sharpens your abilities to deal with those emotions in the real life later on.
Oh, absolutely. I will 100% agree with that.
There's actually an article that I read not that long ago, and it's not role-playing games in particular, it was an MMO, but this kid was walking to school and a moose attacked his sister and himself.
Oh, I just read that article too. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, that's crazy.
And he used his knowledge of the abilities that his character had in this video game in order to think up things to try to fend off the moose. And while I'm not trying to say that video games help you fight moose,
that's totally a PSA for kids. Play more video games. Learn how to fight monsters,
woodland creatures,
and you will learn how to defend yourself against woodland creatures like bears and moose. Please, let's have a bunch of little kids trying to fight off bears and moose now. Ding, like PSA over.
but buried within the ridiculousness of such a story is, I think, a kernel of truth. And what that kernel of truth is, I think, or at least the way I took it, is that he's been put in situations where the tension was real. He had to think on his feet and be fast and not hesitate. He had to be decisive and proactive. And in doing so, he ended up saving both of their lives. And I think that if he hadn't experienced those kinds of moments playing a game, having to think on his feet and be quick, then he probably wouldn't have been able to do so in real life.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think that brings up a good point about, these games, role-playing games in general, but just specifically, tabletop, 5e, Pathfinder, whatever you're playing, it allows you to build on, I think, what I'll call it is emotional problem solving, right?
Mm-hmm.
It allows you to experience an emotion, process it, and say, okay, how am I going to use that emotion, or how am I going to use this moment to succeed or to my advantage, or this, that, and the other, right? I don't know if that came off right at all. It doesn't sound like it, but
how do I triumph in this situation?
How do I triumph in this situation? How do I make things better? Because obviously either the scenario is getting worse and I'm experiencing sadness, anger, frustration, or I'm experiencing these good things that are happening. How do I keep those good things happening without, ruining it and ending up going into chaos, What do I do to keep these things? Those emotional, moral quandaries that we have to deal with in life, I think, become much easier to handle and much easier to solve when you've had to do it in a fantasy setting. When you've had to do it,
it's practice.
It's entirely practice for.
Yeah, it's not only something that helps build an experience that you have this, like you were saying before about movies and stories, how you can watch it and feel a certain way, but it also builds up certain pathways of action, and it allows you to create experiences rather than only be passive to them, which I think is a very important extra side thing. Is it's not just about how can we feel this cool feeling for one game.
Mm-hmm.
It's these are building valuable pathways and skills that you can actually use. I can definitively say that role playing has made me much better at a lot of other things in my life, and it's given me a lot of confidence in other new ways because directly of going through it in games.
Absolutely.
I have by proxy become a swordsman because I've now had to fight as a fighter for forever.
Yeah.
By the way, I can cast magic.
You can cast magic.
I'm a real life wizard.
I can cast magic now.
I learned from my role playing experience, and I made a deal with the devil, and I'm now a warlock.
Oh, awesome! What is your patron like? If you could have a patron, what would your patron be?
It would be a jazz musician of some kind.
Oh, probably 100%.
It would have to be. But seriously, as far as trying specifically for an emotion that you decide on ahead of time, I think is kind of the first point that we were wanting to make, or at least it sounded like.
Yeah.
Well, I think by this time we should probably actually be hey guys, we're the dudes of Yore. Welcome to.
We are the dudes of Yore.
5.
Yes,
sure.
We never actually. We skipped straight from we skipped banter, which is usually how we.
Dude, it's just stream of consciousness at this point. We just.
I think we covered that.
Time.
Intro.
I think we covered that already while you were away from the mic.
We did.
But, yeah, I might have.
Okay.
Did I miss it?
We actually
do I now
revealed.
Am I now the asshole?
No, it's okay. We did reveal that Steven Tyler was now a part of our podcast.
Yeah, he's sponsoring it. So
nice.
Aerosmith is now going to be a sponsor for Dudes of Yore. So you're welcome with that.
I'll tell you what. If ever a warlock patron existed,
Steven Tyler is a warlock patron.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't look at that face and tell me that he's not a gelfling.
He is a gelfling. He is 100% a gelfling.
And I mean, obviously,
if he's not a patron, he's at least seen some.
He's at least seen some patrons.
He's seen some shit. That's for sure.
The only reason he has a voice like that has to be coming from some sort of either demonic or angelic intervention of some sort, like
Pact of the Warble.
Pact of the Warble.
There you go.
That's perfect.
So yeah, Jeff, go for it.
Did you just combine both of our names and call him Jed?
Yes.
Jad. Right. Jeff.
All right.
Jeff.
Enough shenanigans. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Dues of Yore podcast, RPG podcast. I am Jeff Doty, joined here by Jeremy, Lilly, and Chad Nick. Say hi, guys.
Hello.
Who are these people?
Haha. And yeah.
Yeah, I'm Jeremy. Yep.
Oh yeah.
Episode 5. As you've probably gathered by now, we're talking about emotions, how you can use them. How to get better at using them as a player, as a GM. Kind of getting into the actual tips and tricks part of it here, the formal episode here. So Jeremy, you were just kind of getting into it. Where did you want to start with it?
I was just saying, I think one of the points that we were really wanting to hit pretty heavily was how to set the emotional stage, if you will. Like how to, if you're going for a specific emotion, or tone with your game or your session, how do you go about achieving that?
So I think we should just get the basic, like, every episode point out of the way here real quick. The first and honestly most important thing that we'll just get out of the way is you got to have players who are actually willing to do it. Like, it only takes one person who's not going to jump full into it that can just absolutely derail whatever tone you're going for. If you have any sort of serious, real tone you're trying to hit and you have someone who's just not going for it, like, that's gone out the window and you're never going to get it back.
If you have the Doritos eating, like, sit on the back part of the room, hey, are we in the room yet? Are we in the room yet? No, we're not in the room. But I want to be in the room with the person. Can I be in the room with the person now? No, you can't. Okay. Yeah, no, if you're going to be
I think,
that
like,
guy.
There's a certain amount of people, and it's totally fair and valid, who, like, don't want, like, to feel a lot of stuff in their games.
That's
like,
true.
They just want a nice, easy time. So, like, pick players who are actually willing to experience things like fear and sadness and craziness and things like that is the step one. So I think it's kind of like a quote obvious one, but the important one.
Pick invested players
who are willing to go for it.
Pick invested players that will be willing to dive right into your whatever theme you've set up. And hopefully, like, one thing that I will say is I think it's really important too that if you're putting out like an interest post or you're letting somebody know that, hey, like, I really want to run this game, let them know kind of the emotional. If it is going to be like a one shot or if it's going to be like a campaign, like, let them know, like, the emotional arc that it might take. Like, I don't want to walk into a game and assume one thing and then all of a sudden, like, I get there and then now the emotional tone is completely different. So, like, if you're going to run a horror game, I know what to experience with fear. I know that if you're going to run, like an action or whatever, I know that there's going to be like a lot of suspense that I'm going to have to deal with. If it's going to be more comical and more, like, loosey-goosey, like, I get that too, and I'm okay with that. But just let me know by putting a little tagline that says, like, what you expect as a DM. If I feel like I can be open-ended, great. I'll be just loose and free and not really care. But if you want it to be serious, tell people you want it to be serious. And then that way you'll be able to choose proper players for what you expect.
Well, and it helps knowing in the beginning what the expectation is, because there's so much of that you can just get out of the way as a shorthand whenever everybody's on the same page starting off. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you lead into a game, like, either, interest posts or picking your players or with your home group or whatever, and you start off saying, hey guys, this is going to be a more serious game. We're going to dive into heavier themes, so be ready for that. Like that kind of already just kind of sets the standard. So when you like log in to Hangouts or when you get to the table or whatever, you can kind of put that at the front of your mind and say like, okay, like I want to get myself into that kind of mode. So I'm not, cracking jokes right off the bat or, going off on this whatever tangent. Like we're going to keep it in the zone that we're talking about. So setting up that expectation as a GM, often just coming right out. You don't have to give away, the big whatever. You can just say, like, this is going to be a more serious game. I'd like people to be serious about this.
So the big
and often that's
evil
enough to at least
is
get
also
people in.
your father. Yeah.
Spoilers.
Wow.
The big evil's
alert,
also
Chad.
your father.
You gotta put a spoiler alert on that.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I'll be quiet.
But yes, not every game needs to have a strong emotional note.
Yeah.
But
yes.
Those can be very rewarding games, and there are certainly specific genres or settings that work better with certain emotions. And again, that can act as somewhat of a shorthand that can help kind of get you and the players into the same mind space. You know that when you're sitting down to play Cthulhu, more than likely, there's not going to be a bunch of slapstick comedy.
Yeah, I would hope not. But
yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of curious what's like a comical Cthulhu would be. Somebody please run that for me.
Yeah.
I will play in that if you want to pick up comical Cthulhu. I want to do it.
The Three Stooges meet Cthulhu.
Cthulhu.
I think I personally will pass on that one, but you guys have a blast with it if that's your thing.
Scooby-Doo means
Yeah, I totally agree that like setting and system and kind of the world that you're in can play a huge part of, what you're again, it's just kind of building that expectation of like what kind of way are we trying to feel about this? Like if I go into, Iskloft or Harbinger or something like grimy and dirty, like I'm kind of going to be ready for that and expect that. Where if, I'm in some crazy, high-flying, swashbuckling, magical setting, maybe my expectations are different going into a game like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so when a player does want a specific tone, a certain kind of emotional note, what are some of the tips and tricks that you can do to achieve that? Not to warn people about it or get people on the same page. How do you actually go about achieving a tone when the game starts?
Ooh, okay, that's a good question.
So I think for me, the way in which you portray information is often much more of a contribution to the tone than necessarily the words that you're saying. So if you're going into like an action scene and you need quick, super fast, like adrenaline-filled responses, and you're just like, okay, so the guy comes up with a gun, he points it, and he shoots. Like,
yeah,
I was trying so hard not to laugh.
Like, I know, it's so like anemic. But if you're like, there's a guy right there, the gun's in your face, you like hear the gun cock. What do you do? And it's like if you say it and you put in the energy that you're trying to get out, like you kind of. What you put in is often a lot of the times what comes back out if you have receptive and open players. True. So saying it in the way that you're trying to make them feel can often give them a big latching point to actually feel those emotions. If you're trying to make them scared, speak suspensefully or speak quickly with adrenaline. If you're trying to make them sad, speak in that kind of way. The tone of your voice, the inflections that you speak with, can give a lot of cues for people to pick up on.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that. I think another good point is also keep in mind like your setting, right? Like keep in mind the theme of what you were hunting for, right? So one of the ones that I did recently was a thing called Vow of the Void Lord, which was a play on Oath of the Frozen King, right? And the way that I went about doing that one is I set up, I was like, I really want it to be horror filled. Like I really want there to be some deep suspense. I really want there to be like these moments where it's cinematic in the tone of how dark and how gritty and grimy it is, and hopefully that'll come across on screen. And so I set up situations, and the way that I described setting pieces, like the ship itself, the way that the debris had floating bodies in it, things like that. All of these little set pieces that not only did I vocally articulate that in like a very suspenseful way, either softly or aggressively, however you want to do it, but also I narrated visually what it looked like so that you get both the vocal and visual at the same time. I think that's really important when you're trying to set the stage for any scene or any encounter. You want your players to be able to visually see that and be able to react to what they would do given the space that they're now in.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of that has to do with staging. I mean, it's a more abstract form of staging because you're only really using a voice, or maybe you're using pictures. But like, if you were going to put a chair on a stage and you're going to light that chair by itself, the audience is going to pay attention to the chair and nothing else. So if you want them to pay attention to more than the chair, then you need to provide more light. You need to shed more light on more things. So if you're wanting the audience to focus in, then you keep your narrations short and you point them directly at the emotions or the pieces of tone that you really want to resonate with them. And if you start doing too much, then it's going to give them conflicting emotion. It's going to confuse their attention, if you will.
Yeah, and I think you kind of combining what Chad said and then going into what you said, I think honestly probably one of the most important things is kind of like what you were saying there. You have to have an actual intent of what you're trying to make them feel. Like, It's not enough just to play out whatever events, however you think of, and then wonder why that they're not attached to it. Like, for the example that you used a little bit earlier on, Chad, for that Fractured, that Harbinger game that I ran, I went into that game saying, I want the players to feel confused and helpless. I want them to feel scared and for things to just keep on happening and have them have no idea what's going on. Like, that was the point from square one. And knowing that that was the point allowed me to kind of trim all the fat off of what would otherwise be. So like leaving no encounter in there that's like, well, why is this really here? What's this person actually contributing? Like, if they're not making the player more confused or scared, then they're not in the game. Like, I think kind of knowing what you're trying to go for, I appreciate that. But yeah, knowing what you're trying to get out of the experience and out of the game allows you to kind of focus everything around that and build exactly into it and leave the distractions and leave the unnecessary elements out, at least for that session or that portion where you're trying to achieve that tone. Like Jeremy said, if you light too much, then nobody knows what they're supposed to feel about anything. But if you just really put that spotlight on just that one spot, they have no choice but to give into it. Like, there's nothing else, so they have to kind of fall in line with what you're putting out. So if you know ahead of time what you're trying to do, that can let you really focus in on just that and trim the excess.
That's really good.
And people who are good storytellers in their own right, which I think that most people who play role-playing games, at least in the way that most of the people do with AbTab, is that they're going to reciprocate. When they understand what you're going for, what your goal seems to be emotionally or genre or whatever, they're going to fall in line and fall into step with you. And again, that's a huge help because, like we said before, energy is contagious in any kind of performance art. So when you, like you said, when you come to the table filled with the proper kind of emotion that you want, other people, if they're paying attention, if they're intuitive and they're not apathetic, the other, the
empathetic
or empathetic, thank you,
mm-hmm.
then they're going to catch on to what you're doing, and they're going to try to match you, which will increase the energy at the table.
Yeah, I've noticed that a lot too
person.
in a lot of the games that I've played lately, especially in recent months. That it just seems like people are picking up the emotional context and responses for games, and so every game that I've been in recently has just been people are just bringing dynamite to the table. You know what I mean? Like it's one thing after the other. Whether it's a comedy game, people are just dropping wonderful one-liners that like have me rolling for the whole session, or it's a really suspenseful like action thriller, and like we have to work really hard to like get to to that final endpoint, and just it's one of those things that I feel is, I can't even put words to it. I feel like it's
emotional.
Well, yeah, it's an emotional roller coaster, and I like going on those. So, thank you, Jeremy. That's perfect.
I'm here to help.
Yeah, thanks, man. I got stuck in the waiting line, and you just put me on the ride. Thanks.
I think something that kind of going off that, Jeremy, that kind of another easy tool that you can use is to kind of use that in reverse. So not only to put out what you're trying to get them to pick up on, because if they're receptive, then they're going to give that back to you. But you can kind of play that backwards too, where if you see somebody really dig into something about it, like you say something and you catch them just right, you give them a certain thread of like fear, and you see that it really actually gets to them, and they put that fear back towards you. Picking up that like what you just did really worked with them, and then being able to say like, okay, this is like what really connects with them, and like that's got them feeling what I want them to feel. Pick up on that. Feel how they like, see how they react to it and how they respond, and then you can really push right there again and kind of pick up on their energy too. If something really gets them into it, then you know exactly where to keep aiming.
Mm-hmm. And again, that's the part of it being reciprocated. Now you're doing the reciprocation, and when you feed that emotion or that energy back into that emotion, what you're doing is you're reinforcing with the entire group. You're showing them that that's where things need to go, that that's where you want things to go, and they'll be more likely to respond in kind.
Yeah,
it's very much like a tribal or pack mentality.
I will say,
I was going to say it sounds very bad to say it like this, because like, and I don't mean for it to come across bad, but it's like you kind of have to train people in a lot of the same ways that you might train an animal. Like, you get the dog to sit and then you give it a treat. Like that works on people too.
Absolutely.
Like, and it may sound manipulative to say, but I don't mean it like that. But you can, like, if you give them something and then they pick up on it, and then you reward them with either more experience or with something, they're going to say like, oh, if I do this thing, then I get this benefit from it.
If I do thing number 1, I get benefit number 2. Yeah, like it's
reward
awesome.
And punishment. It's proven psychologically sound. Like reward and punishment makes the world go round.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's things built into almost every game system that show that that's the case. I mean, that's why there's things like
trophies,
inspiration points, and experience points, and hero points, and whatever you want to call them. It's so that you can, as a GM, when a player does something that you like and you want to see more of, you reward them for it. You say, yes, that's it. You understand what I'm going for. Everybody else who's sitting at the table that wants that mechanical boon is going to go, aha, okay.
Oh wait, so you mean I need to do something like that the way he's doing it? Okay, cool. Exactly. Then I'll also step my game up a little bit, and I'll do that too.
Yep.
Yeah. I like it.
You can use those feedback chains to kind of build up behaviors and say like, oh, yep, you're really getting it, so I'm going to really push it for you, and then people learn that like, okay, if I'm going to be here and I want the most out of it, and I want the benefits, then I'm going to need to give the requirement to receive that, and kind of you can build kind of emotional feedback loops by with people who are really receptive to that kind of thing. Especially if you have the kind of experience where the emotion is the reward, then you can really push it up then, because then it's not even like, okay, well, I'm going to give you experience. It's like,
I was going to talk about that.
We're going to make this more powerful. We're going to push it further, and that's what's beneficial. Then you can really get some super high level stuff happening.
I played in a game recently that I feel like exemplifies that. And if I could just, for a minute, like, shine a light on that, it would be Megan's Mission 99 game that I recently played on Dice on Ice. That thing was the biggest emotional roller coaster I've ever been on in my life. And partly it's because of the very smart way she did things as a DM. Before the game even started, she gave us a list of questions. We had to fill out 10 questions. And they were all, like, very personalized questions to both us as players, but also us as characters, right? And then she took those questions and she built the 3-part mini campaign out of all of those questions, right? And we had no idea what to expect. We didn't know what was going to go on. Like, we were literally left in the dark. But when we got in game, I can tell you right now, I have never had to experience emotions on such a visceral level that have been reciprocated from the other players. Vice versa, we had to choose players in that game that were both our comrades and our friends, and also moments where we had to have, like, really negative moments with our fellow companions. And so, like, I'm not going to give anything away, but the way she dynamically pieced these things together made the emotional impact of that entire game from beginning to end mean so much more to me at the very end of all this.
Yeah, and what's really helpful with the like the Dread style questionnaires like that is you can pick the questions to focus exactly on the theme that you're going for. Like, for example, I played in a game recently that Nick Dawson ran that we used those kind of questionnaires. And, like, the questions on there, it was, like, a very, like, kind of post-apocalyptic, like, struggling for survival kind of game. So the questions were things like, when was the last time you killed somebody and why? So it's like, your character's already done that before the game even starts. Or when was the last time, like, what's the most desperate thing you've ever done for food, like, since the world's gone to shit? And it's just, like, answering those questions, it's like, that already kind of puts you in a state even before the game of, like, okay, this is the kind of stuff that I've had to do to make it in this world and to be a part of this. So it can really give you a lot to work with even before you get to the actual game.
And at the very least, it narrows down the colors that you have to paint with. If to put another analogy to it, it kind of gives you the palette. It tells you what the tone is going to be. So you can come somewhat armed with the right tools, or at least the right mindset, in the very, very beginning of the game. It cuts out a lot of the stumbling around at the beginning.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely going to be using a lot of those tactics from now on. I think if I run a game like that, I'm definitely going to use, like, a questionnaire beforehand. Even it doesn't even have to be the same tone. It just has to be like, I want to use that because I feel like it gave me such a broader dynamic grip on my character than I've ever had before. Like, you come up with a character design for a game normally, and it feels okay, but you don't really get, like, deeply invested in that character until about 2 to 3 sessions in. You know what I mean? Like, if you're playing in a campaign and you write down your character, you're not going to feel that character and really feel like that character until about 2 to 3 sessions in. Now you've got a solidified idea of that character, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, once you've actually played through some conflict.
Exactly. You've had your first encounters.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
and I think, sorry, just real quick, I think kind of one more tip kind of going off of that, like you said, it kind of limits the palette with those kinds of questionnaires. I think that kind of brings up a broader point, too, that can be a very useful tool as a GM, which is not being afraid to put restrictions up front as far as what people can can't do. Like, for example, like a lot of the ways that I think Iscloft is able to run the way that it runs is because, it's humans only, very limited magic. So it's like that gives you that right off the bat. You kind of know, like, okay, this is not going to be, a million dragons in the air, craziness happens. It's like, this is going to be very,
exactly what to expect.
And grounded.
Yep, exactly.
So, and it cuts out the guy who's like, oh, well, I'm going to like play like the crazy, tiefling
I'm
warlock.
the crazy wizard,
like,
man.
I don't really know if that's going to work. Like, it's just like, nope, like that's not really what we're trying to go for. So like,
Right.
If you have a specific feel, do not at all be afraid to say like, you cannot play these sorts of characters, even if it's like a broad, like emotional thing. Like you're not allowed to play, just some crazy jokester.
You're not allowed to play Deadpool at a funeral. Like, just don't do that. Just don't.
Or
don't come to that.
Or even things like you can't play evil characters. That's not what we're doing in this campaign. That's not what.
That'd be like if you tried to run
don't do
a what is it? A Convoker session or a one shot, and they're like, I'd like to play an evil Convoker. Well, you can't do that. That's not a thing. But I want to. The Corruptor was an evil Convoker. Like, all that stuff. Like, oh, hey, yeah, no, please don't.
So don't at all be afraid to say like, these are the races and classes and even morality scopes or like character traits that we're going to have, and these are the ones that we're not going to have, and like, put your foot down.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people can kind of get timid with it of like, oh, well, if somebody really wants to, but it's like, if the feel really is that important to you,
right,
like it is to me, then like you kind of have to be willing to put up those walls in certain spots to make sure that the theme doesn't get broken.
Yeah, and like if it's a game where the tone or the emotion is not something that you're trying to go for as being a very heavy element of the game, then maybe the restrictions aren't as important. But
yeah,
if in fact there is a problem that these options bring to the table that kind of counteract this emotional note that you're going for, then yeah, you shouldn't feel the least bit hesitant to put your foot down and say, hey, this goes against the emotional chord that I'm trying to strike, so it's out. Plain and simple.
Yes, exactly.
So, one of the things that I think we should address, and I think this will probably encompass kind of how to go about this as a player, but when we're talking about being the instigator of the tone or the emotion that you're wanting to create for the table, and we're talking about these passing the energy or the feedback loop, but how do you be the person who starts that? So again, kind of to throw another tie back into acting, how do you manifest emotion so that when you sit down and start the game, you kick it off correctly? How do you fake that?
That's a fantastic question. Okay, so I'll give you some experiences from my background a little bit. As far as I'll use a big example for like taxes, right? So when I went into Lore Keepers working on taxes, like there were certain things that like Rob and I had talked about taxes that I knew that I wanted as a core value or core things in his emotional construct. One, he was a complete loner. He felt like he had no family, no anything. But he was striving for that. Like that was something that he was striving for, is like family, acceptance, understanding. But he was really guarded. So I was trying to find a way to emotionally express that. And I think over time, it has come out and then come to fruition. And there's been this big overarching thing, which I'm very happy with. But initially coming to the table, I knew that I wanted him to be very reserved. I knew that I wanted him to also be very like antisocial and aggressive, very primal and very bestial, because he's not accepted by humankind because he's different. And in order to express that, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to have to be kind of a jackass for the first, like, 1 or 2 sessions because he's not going to want to be social and interactive with human beings in a safe space, you know? Until he figures out that, like, other people are okay with him, he's going to be very reserved, like a pound animal, right? Somebody who hasn't had a lot of attention and impact next to him, you know, emotional impact. So other people feeding off that, and then, like, the other players feeding off that and kind of helping me to get over his emotional arcs were really, really cool for me, I think. Because, I don't know, I just think that that's how I approach characters, is I think about, okay, here, what is the one core emotion that I can focus on for this session? What's the one core emotion that I want to, like, really look at during this? And maybe another player brings it up. But for me, I usually try to come to the table with one core emotion that I'm thinking of for that particular game. And then go forward from there.
Yeah, you build an emotional dossier.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. You build like an emotional characteristics, traits, his quirks, all that kind of stuff, and then you slowly, like, teeter it down from there as you go further and further into the role play.
Yeah, something that I kind of like to that I work on a lot, and I think is kind of, I don't know if underused, but it's something that's been on my mind a lot lately, is, like, don't be afraid to react genuinely. Like, I feel like a lot of people, when they, like, hear they're, like, a tough decision's put in front of them, or, like, a complicated emotion is put in front of them, they try to, like, pause and parse through it before they decide, okay, this is what my character is going to do. And I think trying to pull back the barrier a little bit between, like, the instant emotional hit that you feel as a person, like as the player, as a human, and instead of trying to wait and filter that out and then decide what the character is going to do, like, don't be afraid to just, like, if something just immediately hits you, to just push it right back, and, like, really just let your first instinct push you.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes, a lot of the times, are, like, the most powerful response to a situation like that is going to be the immediate response. And, like, the more that you try to wait and feel it out, like, the less genuine it's going to feel, which can kind of pull away.
It's going to feel scripted versus, like, immediate guttural response, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Like, it's actually something that and, like, even if you're not saying something in character, to, like, don't be afraid to react to things. This is actually something I think Jeremy is fantastic at, and one of the reasons that I love playing with him is that, you know, if something crazy happens, you see it on his face immediately.
Yeah, exactly.
And that expression comes through, even if he's not the one interacting, even if he's just watching. You can
get
see,
so much
like, if
joy
something exciting happens, he'll, like, clap,
face.
and, like, his eyes will light up. Or something terrible happens, you'll see, like, the frown and the concern. Like, just don't be afraid to let that show. In fact, I try to push actively to let that show the more that I play with people like Jeremy, because of how much it adds to the game, to get that visceral, immediate, this is the feeling that I'm having right now. I think is a very useful thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, like, I have found that if I give in to that, my investment automatically increases. That is the easiest way for me to further indoctrinate myself into a game.
Yeah.
Is to just dive in like I'm a kid watching a Sunday morning or Saturday morning.
When you jump off the high dive and you just dive right into that emotion and you just don't even care that you're going to cry. You don't care that you're going to, like, probably break your voice from screaming so much because you're angry. Like, it doesn't matter what you do, or what the scenario is. At the end of the day, if you have a visceral reaction and it sparks another visceral reaction from a fellow player or from the DM, like, that is my joy at the end of the day. Like, when I go back and I watch games or whatever, and I see all of the faces that, you know, reacted to either a moment that I had or we reacted to another player's moment or whatever, like, it's all just wonderful to me. And I get more enjoyment watching it back too, because like there are things that like maybe I missed or maybe I didn't hear right. And then you watch it back and you're like, oh my God, why did I miss that? Oh my God, that's such a good thing. I had so much fun with that.
Well, and I think there's a reason why people talk about emotions as if they're nerves. Because, I mean, they kind of are in a way. And the best way to feel an emotion, and if that's what your goal is when you sit down to play, is you have to expose your nerves. You have to open yourself up and let those emotions pour through you. Yeah. Without your bullshit, without your walls, without your reservations.
Or without you trying to make it perfect. Like the one thing that I've learned through playing with you guys and through other people, like I think in some people's minds, like they want to have a moment, right? You want to have that moment. So you set it up in your brain, you set it up ready to go. Like you've got it like a cannon and you're ready to just fire it. And it happens. Don't do that because you start overthinking it. When the moment comes, the genuine sincerity of the moment dies, right? Mm-hmm. If you just let it be and you just dive into the moment at the right time, it's so much more impactful than if you have like a little script ready and you have like this idea in your head of how you want to plan out the event or whatever. Plus the DM, like the GM is guiding you to something. You already know that because of whatever, but just let it happen. Don't push for something that maybe you shouldn't.
Yeah, and I mean, not to make yet another theater analogy, but probably one of the most prolific things that I remember from theater training is that if you are on stage, you are never not performing. If the show is going, even if you're not monologuing, even if you don't have any lines and you're part of the chorus in the background, you better be performing. You need to be paying attention to who it is that's speaking. You need to be reacting to what it is that they're saying in a genuine way because it's still your job to sell the story. And the same applies for role-playing games. If you want more out of your role-playing game, then you need to be involved in what's going on, even if you're not the one talking or rolling dice. That's how you're going to stay emotionally connected to what's going on, is by connecting yourself emotionally. And that way, I mean, even your character laughs at inappropriate moments most of the time.
Totally.
So it's okay if you do it as a player, as long as you try to do it as a character. Laugh the way that your character would laugh inappropriately.
No, that's false. Don't listen.
Yeah, and I think, like you say, don't be afraid to like really just give in to like your own feelings. Like I think that it's very easy, and this is something that like I've been kind of to go a little bit into theater stuff. Is like even when you're playing a character, you're also still you. And it's like often the things that are going to give you the most connection are going to be the feelings that you have. And like, even if, like, as long as your character is not completely outside of yourself, which I think there's an interesting conversation you can have about whether it's, good or bad to make characters who are like you or not like you or whatever in certain ways. But
sure.
Like, side topic
to
for
just
another day.
Even though you're playing a character, there's still your feelings and like your meaning and your emotions. Mm-hmm. So don't be afraid to let you show in that, even if you're not necessarily you, quote, you're playing your character. In a lot of ways, you're still going to be the same thing because we can't not be us. It's just not possible. So don't try to suppress that. Like, let it show. And I think that'll bring your characters to life more than you think that it might hurt it. To just let it, let you react just as much as your character is reacting, because it's gonna feel the most real. Is when
I feel like I've cried more times this year in games than I probably should have. Let's put it that way. I've been more emotionally compromised in games this year than I have been in a long time.
Wow. Man.
Yeah. It's a good thing. It's a great thing.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, especially for people who are more story-driven, more role-play-driven. I mean, that's all you can ask for, really. So,
yeah.
I mean, is there anything else that we need to cover, or have we actually done this in?
Oh my god, an hour? That's
there is one thing that I did want to bring up, both as a quick player and a GM thing, and this is again something that a lot of the people that I play with, Jeremy included, and a lot of others do a lot of, is find media that portrays what you're trying to portray, and don't be afraid to use the heck out of it, especially like music. Like if you can, it's one thing to be able to just put a scene through and put the feeling that you want into it, but if you can also say, here's a link to a song, put this on in the background, so that you can still hear, of course, and be involved, but that you can feel that music playing, like, or like having a audio file that you can play, or a music or a song that you can play that really hits home exactly what you're trying to get across. Like that for me, like a song can put me in a mood like quicker than basically anything. So if you can give me, a piece to work with, it's like, this is the song that portrays the feeling that I want you to feel immediately right there. I have it.
Perfect.
Or like a story or a poem or an audio recording or something like that. Like those kinds of tools can be massive, massive ways to immediately just grab people, because it kind of hits them at a different emotional plane than just like words do. Kind of goes under it.
Well, and again, like human beings have a primal nature. As much as people want to rail against it, it's true. And it rears its ugly head more times in a bad way than in a good way. However, it can be used for positive. And I think, for one, storytelling hits a very primal note for us as humans, I think. But also, music. Music is one of the most primal ways to unify people.
Whether it's through instruments or
to move people. Absolutely, yeah. People will disagree on style and genre and things like that. But if you lay down like a solid beat of music, most people are going to feel moved with it. And I think, I may be wrong about this, but I'm actually fairly certain I read an article that talks about how your circadian rhythm and your heartbeat can actually fall into sync with a rhythm.
That's cool, man. Like, I didn't know that. I mean, like, that's super cool.
Yeah. Music is very, very deep to the human connection. There's something about it that really connects with us on a very subconscious level. So you should absolutely use it.
It has a way of like connecting like at the level below language. It's like I feel like language can get you very close, but it can't, words can get you close to what it feels like to feel sadness or anger or joy or whatever, but it can't exactly describe it because it's a feeling below that like level of your brain. But music can absolutely tap into that like direct line, song to consciousness of like what it means to be like that. And using that as a way, like if somebody sends me a song and it's like, this is how I want the game to feel, like immediately, I'm there, I'm with them, and it's like there's no language barrier, there's no articulation barrier, it's just like the pure raw feeling. So like absolutely use those tools, like build a playlist for your setting or for your game, like write or use an intro song to your game, something like that. Like it can really go a long way towards putting people in the right mindset.
After playing in Chrome City, I absolutely will do that from now on, because like Jeremy, dude, you've been killing it with Chrome City, and every time I go to play, about an hour before the game, I pop on the Spotify, I pop on the Chrome City soundtrack, and I just go to town on nothing but Blade Runner and synthwave for about an hour, and it just makes me hunger to like go and play Hargraves and kick ass and take names.
Yeah, music is a huge tool that I use. I mean, for the most part, I actually don't listen to much contemporary music anymore. I usually, because I play fairly frequently, I'm usually going from one game to another, so I usually am just switching between playlists. But I listen to music all day long while I'm at work and usually in the commute back and forth. And certainly while I'm prepping and while I'm playing, it does a lot for me. So.
Yeah, same.
Cool. Well,
that's awesome, guys.
Alrighty. Well, that was my one footnote that I had to tack on at the end there. Was that
I think
one.
It's a great note to add.
Yeah.
It certainly is something that feeds into emotion, or it can. It's especially good for establishing tone.
Yes.
Cool.
This is cool, man. Well, I'm really impressed with us. I'm very proud of us, guys. We finished in just over an hour. Wow.
Yeah.
That's kind of amazing.
And some of that's like pre-recording stuff too.
Oh, that's
so that
true.
Won't even be
so it'll even be smaller, I guess, unless you want to include all of the early banter.
All of the gold that we spun.
all that gold we spun.
I don't think we need to include like us syncing the audio and talking about how we're starting to record, but...
Oh.
Well, I mean, we could always have it where there's both introductions to the episode.
Sure.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Intro on top of intro on top of intro. It's introception.
Yeah.
Introception.
In fact, welcome, guys, to the Dudes of Your podcast for the third time.
We've reached a wormhole. We're never going back. Oh, God.
We've reached a time loop.
Let's go
This episode
further.
is going to go on forever.
It's an emotional loop.
Repeat.
We've reached an emotional loop where it's just going to be nothing but a laugh track and us going back and forth into the intro.
Well,
Alrighty.
before that happens...
Unless there's... Go for it.
Oh, man.
Oh, yeah. I'm going to start the top spinning here at the end. So, yeah, I think we've pretty much covered it. So, this has been episode 5. I don't know if we've come up with a snazzy title yet, but it'll be something emotions.
We improvise one every time, remember?
Yeah, that's true.
That's our sign-off, right?
Oh, yeah.
We'll figure something out.
Yeah.
Whatever.
So, I've been Jeremy. This is where one of you
Oh, yeah. That. I am Chad.
and I'm Jeff.
We are professionals. If you
Oh,
can't
I am
tell.
leaving
professionals.
I am absolutely leaving that pause in there. That is not getting cut out.
As you should. This is raw, ladies and gentlemen.
We are raw.
Yeah.
We are emotion-filled. I'm going to go cry in the back because I have to deal
in the
with...
bathtub.
I'm going to go cry in the bathtub because these guys are amazing. I don't know what to tell you.
Well, thank you guys very much for listening. Yeah, this has been an emotional ride, for sure.
Sure.
But a fun one.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, guys.
So I think really what we should end it on is just the visual image of Chad in the bathtub.
Me in the bathtub crying? Okay, fine. Just leave me here. Just leave me.
Everybody just take this moment to really imagine Chad just sobbing in the bathtub. Just
one of those-
ugly
one of
crying
those-
beyond belief.
One of those moments where he's like laying in the bathtub, but the shower is on.
Exactly, yeah.
Don't tell me how to live my
The
life.
shower's on. He's got like a drink that he's also trying to drink in there still, and it's just getting watered
It's like
down
my
by the
iced tea
shower.
is just shaking the glass and then they said that I wasn't good enough
Diluted
to be
with
on their
the shower
podcast.
water and his tears.
It's just nothing but salty tear water at that point.
Oh my goodness.
Yep. I've reached
Right.
a new low, ladies and gentlemen. I have cried on a podcast. That's awesome. I cry on demand. Wink.
With any luck, something about what you've just listened to is both informative and entertaining. Be sure, if you're interested, to get in touch with us. You can find Jeremy Lilly on his YouTube channel, The Erasmus Expeditions. Jeff Doty can be found on his YouTube channel, Encounterbalance. And Chad Nick can be found on his YouTube channel, currently under his name. I guess that about wraps it. Huh? Oh, right. This is but one of many grand tales, traveler. The coin in the hat is much appreciated. We will return with further stories and advice for your listening pleasure. So be sure to return when you pass through here again, and the road has worn you down. The next round is on us.